Hi, Seton. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Hi, Elaine. Thanks so much for having me. I'm always happy to talk about Emerge.
And Seton, tell us what role you are playing in your community right now.
So I am currently a village trustee for the Village of Woodstock, and I've been in that position for about a year.
And was that your first election?
It was my first election, and it happened about 9 months after I moved to Vermont, and a couple months into COVID, so it was a challenge. But yeah, that was my first elected position ever.
Congratulations. So what kind of Emerge training did you do and when?
So I did the Emerge training for the 2021 year, and it was again during COVID, and so it was online, and it was the signature training, and we had a little over a dozen people in our class.
Yeah. And what is your background and what did you expect to get out of that training?
So my background is in communications. I've done it for NASCAR. I've done it for nonprofits, for advocacy, lots of different ways I've done communication. And so that's the background that I brought to it. I also was raised in a very political family. So I had a lot of sort of field experience, the knocking on doors and looking at envelopes and those sorts of things, the sort of the grassroots of campaigning. But the things that I really didn't know was exactly sort of how campaigning works in Vermont. It's very different from anywhere I've ever lived. Obviously, for village trustee, I could be very personal, so canvassing was definitely key for me. And then making phone calls once COVID hit. But the things that I didn't know were just a lot of the logistics that I think can catch somebody up if they've never run for office before, which is like the deadlines and how you file things. And oh my gosh, the fundraising. Like the fundraising is, I think for a lot of us, was the scariest part, was getting on the phone and saying, "Hi, could I please have money?" It's easy to ask for money for someone else or for an organization that you believe in, but to ask somebody to give you money for your race is intimidating. But the program showed us how to sort of reframe that, and it became a little bit easier. And then the budgeting of, you need this much for staff and this much for media and this much to spend on pizza for your volunteers who are looking at envelopes. There was all of those breakdowns, all the numbers, was really intimidating, but at least now I have an idea of what I need to do.
So you were already in office when you took the training, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And did taking the training impact your decisions about whether to run for reelection or to run for higher office in the future?
Yeah, I've got a 3-year term, so I'm a little bit more than halfway through it. And I would like to run for a higher office. Ultimately, I would love to run for a state rep from my area. There's lots of moving parts about how long people will last in seats and who might take those seats next. So it's not a definitive, but for a long time, I'd always wanted to run for state office. And where I lived previously, it was such a big game. And I sort of thought, okay, well, that's just not going to be, what I ever do. And then coming to Vermont with such an active population and honestly, very active local news, where it's easier to be in touch and easier to know what's going on because you have these great local newspapers and local resources. I realized like, hey, maybe I can do this here, because it is very sort of like old school politics, because it's these small communities.
Yeah, yeah. And did you learn anything about yourself during the training that surprised you?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the things that I learned was what I've probably learned over the years is holding back and listening more. That's always been a challenge for me, and I think some of my classmates in Emerge learned that pretty quickly too. And so I had to sort of step back. But what I learned when I stepped back was that I learned so much more, and that and I think our trainer. Uh, the Speaker of the House, Jill Korinsky, she taught us that so much of campaigning is listening and going out and getting information and building relationships. I knew that was important, but I hadn't really thought about how to logistically put that into practice and how to consciously do that. So I think that it was really important to be around other people who, even though we might have very similar political views and views on issues, the takes that people had were completely different than anything I thought of. I sort of assumed we were all the same kind of person, and we really weren't, which was a huge benefit, I think, to all of us. And so it's really taught me that I need to sit back and listen, and do a little bit less talking, and sort of think about each person as having their own story.
Yeah, yeah. And what is the best part about being involved with Emerge Vermont?
I mean, I think the great parts have been really learning. It's a lot of that background, that sort of off the cuff information that you get about legislators and races that took place in the past. And we had not just our instructor and our classmates, but then we had veteran politicians and advisors from around the state, a couple of national people as well. And so you got to ask these questions that might seem silly or inconsequential, but once you realize the impact it might have on a race, or the impact it might have on when you're in office, it's really important. So being able to dive into those resources and know that it's not just for that day, that it is, that everybody who talked to us said, here's my phone number, here's my email, call anytime. That I think is invaluable. And then just the relationships with people around the state, especially during COVID, it was so tough to meet people. And so now I know people from around the state from very different backgrounds. And there are a couple that I've actually partnered with their organizations to do a little bit of lobbying, a little bit of advocacy work.
Nice.
And so it's really great to have those people, or if they're not the people I need to talk to, I can say, hey, I know you don't work in this field, but do you know someone who does? And so those connections are they're so valuable. And they're also, they're friendships, which is sort of a nice added bonus.
Yeah, the Emerge Sisterhood I've never had one like that. It's so connected in so many ways. And it's been great to be involved with all these and watch all these women do amazing things. And then they help you do yours. It's really a great sisterhood.
Absolutely.
Seton, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your experience with Emerge. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much, Elena. I appreciate it too.
Thanks.